This is the Metal Gateway Podcast. Hello and welcome to the Metal Gateway Podcast. This week on the podcast, Kakophonix. Kakophonix plays the cello in a band called O.C. and the Jupiter, among other projects that he has. But I've now seen O.C. and the Jupiter twice live, both times at metal festivals, and would we call them a metal band? No. But they play a kind of very dark folk music that appeals to a lot of metalheads. I hesitate to actually even put a label on their music because in many ways, to me, it defies categorization. If you haven't listened to them, I encourage you to check them out. I'll drop a link in the show notes. Anyway, I met up with Kakophonix in June of 2023 at a music and arts festival called Cascadian Midsummer. Maybe some of you have been to this festival. If you haven't, it's a wonderful, wonderful community. It's a 3-day event in the rainforest of southwestern Washington state. Completely off-grid festival. There's no electricity, no running water. Don't go unless you like camping and cooking all your own food, but it's an amazing experience. Sort of as a sidebar, here in the Pacific Northwest, which is where I live, we have this kind of running joke among locals that the month of June is often referred to as Junuary, because while technically June is a summer month, it's not uncommon to have rainy, miserable January-like weather in June, which is exactly what happened to us last summer at this festival. This interview was no exception, of course. It was raining off and on during the recording, and Kakophonix and I ended up sitting in his tent during this interview. So, first of all, it will probably be pretty obvious that this was not an interview that happened in the studio, because you'll actually be able to hear the rain on the tent above our heads at points during the conversation. So, forgive that, if you will. But imagine that you're with us in the Pacific Northwest listening to this conversation. One thing I'd like to point out is that he does reference a solo project several times in this discussion. The project is called Hvile, and in early January 2024 of this year, he posted on Instagram that he has decided to actually bring this project, Hvile, to an end. But he does tell me that he is still planning to release some final recordings. So if you're interested in hearing some of that, there's a link in the show notes to that as well. Enjoy the episode. So, Kakophonix, welcome to the show. I'm glad you're here, and I'm glad that we were able to meet up at Cascadian Midsummer.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
You are currently playing cello primarily in O.C. and the Jupiter. And they were, you guys headlined this fest, and that was really a fantastically gorgeous set. I really love seeing you guys again. It was great to get an opportunity to see you guys.
Thank you.
It's the second time I've been able to see you, and so I really enjoyed it. It was a beautiful piece. So today, the purpose of this podcast, like we've discussed, is I want to know how people got into metal music. And so I'm just going to ask you the same basic question I ask everybody to start this conversation, which is, what was your gateway into metal?
Okay, so I'm going to go way back. And, rock and roll music, I was introduced to, the Beatles. Mm-hmm. And I got into, The Who and stuff like that. But I had to introduce... My family wasn't, super into heavy music, so I had to introduce myself to, Led Zeppelin and Van Halen. And
yeah.
Eventually... I was perusing, not even YouTube, I think it was AOL Music, because my internet access was limited at the time, and I discovered God Forbid.
Interesting.
They were this sort of melodic metalcore band from the early to mid 2000s, and I had never heard anything that heavy before.
And around what year was this that you discovered this?
2005.
Okay.
And they just blew me away, and eventually I perused a little more, and I found Arch Enemy. Mm-hmm. The big one for me, because I'd been playing cello for a while, but I didn't really take it seriously, The big thing for me was Apocalyptica, because they played cello and they played Metallica covers and stuff. And I actually got into Apocalyptica before I got into Metallica.
Oh, interesting.
So that was kind of the gateway for me to start taking the cello seriously, because I could play music I actually wanted to play.
And when did you actually start playing the cello?
When I was 9.
And why the cello? What made you choose that instrument?
I'm not really sure, to be honest. It was you pick an instrument for orchestra when you're in 4th grade, and I picked the cello, and I was okay at it, and I picked up guitar too, but it was always very, stop and start, and then I realized I could play stuff on the cello that I couldn't play on the guitar, namely like the super fast stuff, and I realized that, if I want to play metal or anything adjacent, and, it's possible on the cello, so might as well.
Right. And when did you first kind of discover that you could bring the cello into metal music?
Well, like I said, with the discovery of Apocalyptica, I started riffing on my favorite, like, God Forbid and Arch Enemy songs and stuff like that.
Oh, cool. So did you ever record any of your own, covers of stuff, like cello covers of stuff? Or?
Badly. I didn't know anything about recording at the time. I would just record them on, like, a handheld tape recorder or something.
Yeah, okay.
But,
cool. So where did it go from there? Like, after Apocalyptica, how did it evolve for you?
That's a two-pronged answer.
Okay.
Well, I started taking music much more seriously.
Mm-hmm.
I went to a performing arts high school. I went to Los Angeles County High School for the Arts.
Okay.
And
you grew up in SoCal, right?
Yes.
Okay.
I live in Santa Ana currently.
Okay, gotcha.
So I, started taking music much more seriously, and just practicing every day. Like I didn't get into any trouble in high school. I wasn't like a bad kid or anything. I practiced cello, went to school, did my homework, worked out so I'd stay in shape, and went to bed. That was it. That was my life.
Yeah.
I didn't even have much of a social life. But as far as metal goes, metalcore was kind of the thing at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So I, eventually got into stuff like Bleeding Through. I discovered some more obscure stuff like Orphaned Land from Israel.
Mm-hmm.
They were really cool.
Yeah, they're really cool.
Eventually, I discovered black metal, and this is, some people may kind of chuckle at this, but I grew up Catholic, so I discovered black metal through the like unblack metal variety.
Yeah.
Like Antestor and Horde and.
I don't actually know. I know that's a thing, but I don't actually know any of those bands. I'm not familiar with any of those bands. Is there any of that stuff that's worth listening to or checking out?
Some of it, yeah.
What? Tell me something I should check out, because I will go check it out.
Well, Antestor, they actually had Hellhammer play drums for some of their stuff.
Really?
Their album.
That's an interesting choice.
It is. I forget the name of the album, but the one with Hellhammer on it, but it was really good.
Yeah.
There's Admonish have some good EPs. They only put out a couple EPs.
Oh, wow.
Those are some good ones.
I'll go check it out.
But eventually, I was a little too curious, as you say. So I got into stuff like Dimmu Borgir, Mayhem. Obviously, I was never super into Mayhem, but I just I would occasionally bump Freezing Moon and stuff.
Right. Did you play around with cello with any of this stuff? In your room?
Yeah. No, actually, this is really funny. Me and a high school friend formed a really raw black metal band called Executioner's Torment, and I played cello and guitar, and he played bass and guitar, and we'd program the drums or use the keyboard drums and just
yeah.
And we recorded some demos we never did anything with, and years later, like within the last couple of years, Aesop Decker, the ex-Agalog drummer, he has a label called Nocturnal Hustle, and he just wants to release like weird, obscure stuff.
Yeah.
And so we released our old demos as an EP through
Nocturnal
Hustle.
Oh, nice! That's awesome.
It was that was a fun time. Eventually I had a brief phase where I was into brutal death metal. I liked Putrid Pile for a while, Cannibal Corpse, obviously. Eventually I got kind of bored of that stuff as I got more into black metal.
Yeah.
The big kind of turning point band for me was Dissection, particularly because, he took it so seriously.
Yeah.
And I was kind of intrigued with, that story and has just the arc of his life. And, obviously, it's not cool that he killed that dude. That's, I would never condone that.
Right.
But the... just the story of how his ideology and his expression sort of intertwined, I knew there was something deeper there. And so dissection, I didn't discover dissection until like my freshman year in college, but that was kind of the turning point where I decided to form my current main project, which is Hvile. That's Norwegian for to rest in chaos. And I know dissection was a Swedish band, but I was 19 and trying to be cult, so I it sounded cooler in Norwegian to me, so I just chose Hvile. And the basically what I did with that was sort of early apocalyptica-esque, like, not even covers. I wrote them just like cello quartets in a black metal style. And I covered the Somber Lane on my first EP. And that was, sort of a starting point for me, because I was in school for music at that point. I was a cello performance major. But Hvile became sort of a catalyst for me to start studying music composition. And I'd actually changed my major at one point to music composition, and then eventually took on a double major of performance and composition. And Hvile at one point was actually a 4-credit chamber project. Like, I had my comp professor would help me through writing the pieces, and then my cello professor would coach me with the rehearsals. And so I was actually getting college credit for this.
That's awesome.
It was awesome. I'm very fortunate to have gotten to do it.
Yeah, that's incredible.
It really is. And one of my favorite live performance videos from that period, we performed our piece Wailings of Wasted Flesh as just a chamber recital, totally acoustic in a performance hall. And it's still like, one of my favorite performance footages.
That's fantastic.
And like I said, I grew up Catholic, but eventually I started to have questions about that, especially with some of the music I was getting more into, because I was getting, eventually, I leapt from dissection to a stylistically different but ideologically similar band, which is the Devil's Blood. And, they played occult rock and roll. But, I see a lot of similarities in John Nodlight's story and Salim Lamouchi's story, particularly with how their lives ended and what their music existed to express that reverence of death and the beyond, and in a spiritual sense. And I started to become much more and more intrigued. And I'm kind of hesitant to talk about this in an interview, but I had an experience that let's just say I had a very eye-opening experience towards the end of college that showed me that Christianity wasn't really for me. And I started to delve more into, esoteric adversarial practices, and Hvile became sort of a much more spiritual outlet for me.
Yeah.
And the music became, I called it cellistic black metal for a while, which sounded a little corny, but now I call it black ritual chamber music, which I think is more accurate.
Yeah, I like that.
I started incorporating more acoustic guitar and bass and stuff, and now I use like a frame drum for it.
Right.
I was also in another band at the time called Empyrean Throne. It was sort of let's call it like kind of a mishmash stylistically between like Dimmu Borgir, Watain, and Dissection, or not even Dissection, more like Behemoth. And we, that kind of taught me how to write for orchestra effectively. I would layer my cello like 16 times.
Yeah.
And we would.
Were you using other strings as well?
No, just the cello.
Okay.
And I arranged it like a string orchestra, so I'd have quote unquote violin parts.
Yeah.
That were in the higher register.
Sure.
And so I was in that band for a while, and eventually I decided, I wanted to focus much more on my own soloistic outlet. So I left that band and reformed Hvile in 2017, because I'd been in Ohio for my undergrad, and then I came back to California and formed a new lineup, and we started gigging out, and eventually I released the Agios of Photia album, which was the first album I did that was really like truly spiritually charged. And that certainly ruffles some feathers. There were some there's the one piece in particular on there called Vessel 333 that had a lot of spoken word samples. I had a lot of anger towards some things that had happened in my life at the time, so I I recorded this very angry, twisted piece of music, and I invited people to record spoken word samples of things they wanted to get off their chests, and they submitted that to me, and I was really shocked by some of the things that people submitted. I'm not even going to go into it. You need to listen to the piece, but it's very there's a lot of trauma there.
Yeah.
And I've heard stories through the grapevine of people responding to that piece in really, really weird ways. I can't verify this, but somebody told me once that some kid heard that, got way too into that song, and then flipped out and tried to kill a stray dog. There's nothing in there that encourages anyone to hurt animals at all, but apparently that's just how it triggered him. But other people have told me that piece, particularly the people who were involved, have told me that piece really helped them externalize a lot of things, and that it was a very cathartic experience for them.
Oh, cool.
As far as my metal listening goes, I was getting more into orthodox black metal at the time, like stuff like Deathspell Omega. I forget, there's a band called Six. It was like a side project of the guys from Aesoth. It was just the Roman numeral 6, and they had some great riffs. I was also much more into occult rock. I was into, I really liked In Solitude. Jess and the Ancient Ones, that first Jess and the Ancient Ones record is great.
I'll have to check that out.
But also, after I left Empyrean Throne, I started to do a lot more session work, and that was around the time that that was like 2017, and that was around the time I got in touch with Sean from Ozzy and the Jupiter. Neither of us really thought it was going to be anything more than a studio project at the time. He'd done What Album Without Me, Hall of the Wolf,
Right.
But I was on the Uthilling Hill album Forward, and that was a very that was a great record to work on. It wasn't really metal, but it was metal adjacent, sort of ritual ambient, neofolk kind of stuff. And, from that point forward, we just have had a really consistent and great working relationship together. He's in Ohio and I'm in California, so it's mostly remote, but our first performance together was, as you know, Fire in the Mountains 2019.
Yep.
And that was a crazy experience. My flight was delayed due to some inclement weather. So we had to switch the days we were going to play on.
Right, because you guys were going to play the first day, but
the airline just told me like 15 of you can't get on the plane because of inclement weather, and I was of course not really happy about that. But thankfully the fest organizers were able to switch it.
Yeah.
But then there was a storm in the mountains around the time, like about a mile off, and so we had to cut our set short. And the fest organizers were really mad about that. And then we just had to make up for it by playing around the fire pit at night. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah, I remember that very well. And in fact, one of the funny stories from that festival is I went to that festival with my friend Joe, who's an old friend of mine. Joe and I have been going to metal shows together since we were both 16 years old, and I'm not going to tell you how long ago that was. That was a long time ago. And Joe and I went to that festival, and we showed up, and we were taking all our stuff, because that year, remember, the tent area was way up on the hill.
Yeah, I remember that.
And so Joe and I we bummed a ride in the back of this pickup truck with all this gear to take our stuff up the hill, and we ended up riding in the back of the pickup truck with another guy who had just arrived at the festival, and it was Sean. and so it was really funny because Joe's a really chatty person like I am, and Joe just kind of strikes up a conversation with him. He's like, "Hey, how you doing? This is your first time at the fest?" And Sean goes, "Yeah, it's first time." And Sean said, "Yeah, I'm actually playing at this fest." And Joe was like, "Oh, really? Which band?" He said, "Yeah, OC and the Jupiter." And so Joe asked him about the name OC and the Jupiter. It was like named after his dogs, right?
Yeah, his two big German shepherds.
Yeah, right. And so so he told us that story right there in the back of this pickup truck. There's dust everywhere, and we've got all our bags and shit in the back of this tiny little shitty old pickup truck. And so yeah, we ended up sitting and chatting with that guy for like 5 minutes, and it was kind of cool. It was like that was the first guy we met at the fest. Was actually Sean.
Yeah, Sean is such a humble, like, great dude.
He was so nice to us.
Yeah, he's I've had a great working relationship with him, and we recently did a European tour actually in April, and that was just I couldn't have asked for a better crew. It was me and Sean. Eric from Grift was was the other act on the tour, and our tour manager Wolfie, who I believe has driven Awada and other bands. But that was we all got really tight, and it was an unforgettable experience for sure.
That's great. So now we're more or less up to the current day, right? You've sort of taken me on that journey.
More or less. I mean, there's other projects I've been involved in. Like, full disclosure, I've actually played on, I believe, 75 records.
Okay, yeah, because you've done a lot of session work, is what you were saying. Are there any notable session projects that you can talk about or want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, I played with Abigail Williams for a bit.
Yeah.
I actually did some shows with them back in 2012.
Well, and you were on the Walk Beyond the Dark album.
I was on the Walk Beyond the Dark album.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I fucking love that album
so much. I love that album too. I'm really proud of how that worked out.
Yeah.
I also worked for Chrome Waves for a while. It's Jeff Wilson's project.
Oh, okay. I'm not familiar. No, I'm not familiar.
Okay, Jeff Wilson was actually in Abigail Williams at one point.
Yeah, I think I knew that, but I didn't know that he had other stuff that he was doing.
Yeah, so he was in Knock Mystium. He was in Wolfhammer. He was actually the main writer for Wolfhammer, I think. Okay. Chrome Waves is his main thing now. It's sort of a post-black metal project, and I played on a few records of those. He also has a side project called Deeper Graves, which is sort of a goth rock, post-rock kind of thing, so I did some of that.
Everybody's got their own little... I need to start a side project.
One does.
Like a one-man solo, I don't know, funeral doom project or something. Why not?
Go for it.
Okay, yeah, I should do that. Okay, I'll get right on that.
Sweet. I played. What other projects have I done that are noteworthy? I worked for Hvile Mater, who's the singer for Dark Funeral.
Oh, cool.
I did some songs for him, and there's another band from Texas I like to talk about. It's like kind of a melodic deathcore kind of band, but they're called Darker by Design, and they did this very intense symphonic album that involved members of Flesh God Apocalypse and one of the guys from De Obliviscaris.
Oh, wow.
And I did they wanted a soloistic cello for that, but also the string orchestrations that I do. So I basically got to do a lot on their album.
Yeah.
And I'm really proud of that album. I've also worked for Grave Gnosis. They're this orthodox black metal band from Florida that have sort of a twisted psychedelic approach to their music, and they take their philosophy very seriously.
That's cool.
They describe it as Vedantic nihilism. It's more kind of in the anti-cosmic tradition.
That sounds very serious.
They are very serious,
yeah.
And they, I've played on both the last record they did and also their forthcoming album. Also, my bassist for Kaos, he has a project called Resurrectionist that's very intense symphonic black metal that he wrote all the parts. I normally write the parts for the albums that I play on, but he actually had parts in mind because he's a working composer, and so he wrote that stuff for me, and that was really intense to play on.
Cool.
There's many. I could go on and on and on, but I have everything written down on my resume, and
yeah.
Not everything comes to mind immediately.
No, but I get it, and I guess I mean, certainly we could read your resume. I'm curious about things like, what are your thoughts on the role of, because certainly in the past several years, and I don't know exactly, at least the past decade, if not longer, we've seen a much higher percentage of metal in a variety of different genres incorporating strings. I feel like I'm seeing that more in the last 10 years than I ever did before.
Yeah, it's definitely, it's very encouraging.
Yeah. And I guess what I'm interested in is what are your thoughts on on the place of the strings in metal? Where do you think it goes from here?
I believe it has a role to play in terms of, a lot of people treat it kind of like a glorified keyboard, or at least they did in the past, but now it's you know, like Andrea from Excellences is a great example. I mean, she shreds.
Yeah,
like I wasn't really.
absolutely.
I mean, I played with her in Serpentant at Northwest Terror Fest earlier,
Yeah.
about 3 weeks ago.
Yeah.
But we were playing very, you know, simple kind of stripped down parts. So I wasn't really aware of like how good she actually was.
Yeah.
Until I actually saw her play with Excellences.
No,
It's like,
she
wow.
absolutely shreds. And,
Yeah.
I'm interviewing her for the show too, so
Awesome.
I'm looking forward to that discussion.
Awesome. Yeah, no, she's great. I think, like, you know, Apocalyptica obviously played a huge role. I think Tina Guo, the cellist who works with Hans Zimmer, she does a lot of metal and metal adjacent stuff.
Oh, I did not know that.
Oh yeah, she shreds super hard. She can, you know, play circles around me, obviously. But
That's cool.
But as far as the role of it, you know, I think, you know, the temptation is to see it as just sort of an extra tone color rather than like an instrument that can come to the forefront. But I believe that's changing.
Okay. Are you? I mean, you maybe see it as part of your role to help change that, I guess.
Perhaps. I mean, there are a lot of projects where I do take kind of a backseat role because that's what they want. Like, you know, a lot of black metal requires just sort of droney stuff.
And it's probably used more than anything to just sort of add atmosphere.
Yeah, whereas, you know, a project like Darker by Design, like, they wanted me to go ham. And
yeah, and they want the cello to be the star of the show in a way.
yeah, because they had a cellist before me, but he left for his own reasons, so they hit me up, and it's you know, it's just interesting. Like, as a session musician, I kind of tailor what I do to what the artist wants. Like, I you know, I have my own project that's mine, and I really like put everything into Kaos that I want to put into it, and then I take a back seat to what the artist wants in any other given project I do.
Sure.
So, like, you know, for example, in Ozzy and the Jupiter, like, it's Sean's baby, and Sean is expressing what Sean wants to express, and my job is to complement that. So that's those are essentially my thoughts on, like, the role strings play. It's whatever the band needs, but I also think it could play more of a prominent role.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm going to be interested to see how that goes, because I've just for a long time been really fascinated by the use of, you know, non-traditional metal instruments in metal, and I think when it's done well, it's such a treat to see, you know, a cello or a violin or, you know, a fucking accordion, whatever it is, blended effortlessly into the music, where it doesn't feel like it was something that was sort of like added on as it doesn't feel like a useless appendage. It feels like something that's absolutely crucial to the composition, to the performance, that it's, you know, not every band has to be just two guitars, a bass, and a drummer, you know. Like, that's what I just really love this evolution, because I think it's helping to drive creativity, and I feel like it's driving you know, proliferation of interesting subgenres, and there's just all kinds of cool uses for these other instruments, for classical instruments in particular. So
Of course. You know, I'm hesitant to use the term symphonic unless it's actually relevant. Like, as someone with a classical background, like, symphonic implies a full orchestra.
Right.
So just because it has a cello or a violin or a trumpet or whatever, that doesn't make it symphonic. That makes it, you know, just something that has that element added. You know, there are projects that I have done that could easily be described as symphonic, because they require, like, the full 16-track cello choir that I do, and then maybe some other sampled instruments that, you know, like some choirs or a brass section or something like that.
Yeah.
But the, you know, like, when people describe Kaos as, like, symphonic, I'm like, no, it's not. It's chamber music. There's a distinct difference there.
Right.
And like, Ozzy and the Jupiter is folk music. There's nothing symphonic about that.
Right.
So,
Right, and that's like what you said earlier. O.C. and the Jupiter is not a metal band, but it's metal adjacent for sure.
it is. And Sean and I have both played with black metal bands and similar stuff.
Yeah.
And he plays in Burial Oath, and he also has a solo project called Ulven. Both are fantastic.
Yeah.
And then I played with the band I mentioned.
Yep.
And you know, we met through metal, but, you know, this is Sean's folk outlet, and I'm just grateful to be part of it. And it's certainly interesting to you know, really delve into the spiritual aspect of it, because a lot of the stuff I've explored has been much darker and more adversarial and more anti-cosmic, you know, anti-universe, you know, anti-humanity in a way. But when it comes to Ozzy and the Jupiter, It's kind of the opposite side of the coin, where you're affirming life, you're affirming the cosmos, you're affirming nature, you're affirming your place in nature. And that's something I see as equally valid and extremely valuable.
Yeah.
And, like the performance I just gave with Ozzy and the Jupiter here at this fest was very cathartic. It was very, like, purifying in a way. And, it's healthy.
Yeah.
I believe.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And that's our show for today. A couple of the albums that Kakophonix mentioned, one of them was The Forsaken by Antestor, which features Hellhammer from Mayhem on the drums on that album. I'll drop links to a couple of these bands in the show notes. And I just wanted to actually mention in this outro, kind of on the subject of Christian black metal, I know that for a lot of people in the metal community, it's sort of a controversial subject because people have different opinions about whether or not sort of overtly Christian music, kind of belongs in the metal scene. I don't really believe that there's any point in gatekeeping that kind of music. So I'll say for myself that even though I'm not particularly interested in the whole Christian metal thing at all for various reasons, it really just doesn't do it for me. But for some people, I think it was an important gateway into extreme music. And so in that sense, to my mind at least, there's some measure of value in talking about it. So I do appreciate that Kakophonix was really honest with me about that topic, during our discussion. I feel like not everybody would be as honest about that. So kudos to him. Anyway, thank you for listening. The Metal Gateway Podcast is a production of Studio Portcullis. Our theme music is by Tauntaun. If you have comments or questions or suggestions for guests you'd like to see on the show, please email them to me at metalgatewaypodcast@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next week.